This is what I'm deeming as the Carpet Bomber Mercenary. This is the final boss in Act 3 on Cruel difficulty. If you're looking for a build that can basically walk through all 6 acts while lighting up the entire floor and killing all of the monsters, sometimes without you even being able to see the screen, this is going to be the build for you. We're going to finish up this boss fight, and then I will walk you through the process of leveling from Act 1 normal all the way through Act 3 cruel. Check out the rest of this fight, and then we'll get into the build.
5 moves ahead. Enough of this. I can't give up. I must save my people.
You know why we're here? It happened! It cannot be stopped!
No, I will succeed.
Listen!
I
Just
will
care for the
burn you
lady.
alive.
There's no need for all this.
Do you truly think you can match me? Ugh. Unexpected. But non-critical. Nothing will stand in my way! Fatal ambition! This is not over yet. Existence is merely energy. I will burn you alive. Ah! No! Do not fail me. Not now!
So that's the fight. Now, as we go through this planner, I'm going to go over all of the choices that I made up until this point. The gear that I have on, I'll show you what it looks like, so when you get into Cruel, you can start looking for gear like this. Most of the gear is what I found. I specifically didn't use any of the currency or any of the level 3 support gems that I had in my stash. I wanted to make sure we could go from Act 1 all the way until Act 3 on Cruel without any outside use from all of those gems and stuff from playing previous characters. So this build worked. There was a couple different points in the game where I used what I found on the ground, which is the Exalted Orbs, to trade for a couple pieces of gear, but they were very, very minimal cost. I think we only traded for 3 different pieces of gear. If you haven't gotten into trading yet, and you're not playing self-found, make sure you take a look at the link in the description of this video. I have a how-to guide on how to trade. Now, if that is something that you don't want to do, but you still want to get some help, or you still want access to a bunch of different leveling gear, we have a guild that is completely full. We have a guild stash here that we have set up for all of the members. If you're looking for a great place with a super active community, you are more than welcome. Click the link in the top of the description of this video, join the Discord server, and you can apply there. You go to the Clan Q channel, put your name on the list, and we will get you into the guild. It is going to be a really, really great resource for you. They're very helpful, very welcoming, and the channels have been super, super active. So make sure you don't miss out on that. There's a lot of stuff here that will help you out along the way as you go. Getting back into the build. So let's go look at the gear real quick. For your weapons, you're going to be running high physical damage. A lot of the skills that we're going to be using are going to convert from physical damage into an elemental damage of that specific type that it's going to be using. High physical damage. You can get plus ranks to your grenades here. If you do get plus ranks to anything on your weapons, it does increase your mana cost quite a bit. So if you don't have enough mana regen, I would highly suggest not going with anything that increases your skills. But anything that will add you plus damage to physical is going to be a huge increase to you. For the helmet, we're going to be looking for anything that has armor and evasion. If you need to run high evasion instead of armor, that is perfectly fine, but you want to be running 60 to 70% throughout the whole game. At some points of the game, I had about 70% evasion, and it made a big difference. Now, you will see differences in your evasion as you level up. It's going to slowly decrease, so you're going to have to continually upgrade your gear with evasion gear. A couple different ways you can do that. You can either trade for it, which I didn't do very much of at all. I just traded for 1 piece of evasion gear. And then you can also craft it. So that's going to be an option for you as well. So for the helmet here, we're running anything that we can get resistances on, which I don't have on my helmet, but that's what we're running with the runes in it, because resistances are definitely going to be important. Because you're not going to be taking direct damage from most of it, you don't actually have to cap out. It does help. So if you have the option to cap out, 100% please do it. It will make your experience a lot better as you're leveling through. Throughout the different acts, each boss has its own specific resistance that you can use. Act 1 is going to be cold, Act 2 is going to be lightning, and then Act 3 is going to be just a mix of all of them, so having a little bit of all of it will be the best way to get it. But that's the very end bosses in each of those. As I go through and I fight different bosses, after learning the game, I've learned which bosses have higher resistances, and then I can swap around things like my charms here. That makes the game a lot more smooth as I run through. It results in a lot less deaths. For the chess piece here, again, we're running evasion and armor. This was actually something that I found. So I was able to increase this. We use a couple charms that we found as we were going through and put things in. If this had any resistances on, this would be an amazing chess piece, but it still worked and it served the purposes that I needed. For the amulet here, there is a place in Act 3 where you actually get a corruption statue. I tried using it on this to get a little bit of extra boost, but we're running this here just because it had extra max life, extra max mana, and this was the only thing I found with any sort of resistance on it, so that lightning resistance was really important for me. For the rings, we're running fire resistance here, and then we're also going to be running mana regeneration. This was really, really big because it really did make a big difference. I tried taking this ring off to replace it with something else, and the mana recovery that was lost definitely made a difference. Not necessary. Again, resistances are going to be your main priority here. Same thing with the other ring. I had something with fire resistance and lightning resistance on it, so I threw it on because this is going to be super important. Again, it's going to help you survive. For the boots, I actually turned down a couple different pairs of boots because it didn't have movement speed on it. For this build, and actually most builds in particular, movement speed is actually a really great defensive mechanism. The reason is if you move out of what's underneath your feet or from a cast that a monster is casting at you, then you can survive a lot longer. So the more movement speed you have, the better off you are at staying alive. For the belt, I was running anything with max life and resistances because we want to be stacking max life. I actually took a lot of strength in the passive tree, and I'll kind of talk about that when we get to it, because I wanted to stack a little bit more life to make that survivability a little bit better throughout the whole entire gameplay process. For the gloves, the exact same thing. I wanted to run max life. We had a little bit of dexterity and some evasion rating on this one, but I didn't get my resistances, so if I had this with a little less evasion but a little bit more resistance, that would have been perfect. And then for the charms, I swap this around depending on where I'm at, what I'm fighting, and then the bosses that we're at. So that's the gear. Let's take a look at the skills. What I want everybody to do is in the description of this video is going to be the build planner. By the time this video hits, this will be completely updated here. What you can do is I have this set up in order to go by levels. This is about the middle of Act 2. This will be Act 2 to almost into Cruel, and then we'll have the Cruel acts after that. So I broke it up into different ones, and each one of them is going to have what I found throughout the runs. I found only these level 1 support gems as I was going through. If you find more or you have more, absolutely use them. But I want to build this build guide so that when you're running through, if you don't have any previous characters, you don't have to rely on level 2, level 3 support gems inside of a build guide. We can also do, when we get into your 26 to 40, around the 40 mark is when I started to see level 2 drop. So I didn't actually put many in here, but you can make sure to look through and look ahead if you wanted to add in some of the level 2s as you find it. When we get into the Cruel acts, this is where you started to see level 2. I actually managed to find one level 3, but I didn't add that support gem in. I will have a complete endgame build guide coming out, so if you find those, you can actually look at the endgame build guide, and then you can put your level 3 support gems in based on that. It's just going to be a continuation of this build. It is going to have a couple different skills, I'm sure, but as we get into that, it will just be like if you find something for explosive shot, you can add in explosive shot. If explosive shot's gone on the endgame build guide, but you have something for explosive grenade, then you can put the level 3 gem into that. But for this particular build, this is just for leveling. This is just going to get you to Cruel. So make sure you use the different variants on this build in order to figure out where you're at and what support gems you can use for your build. So starting at the top, we're going to talk about just what I ended up with inside of this game and at the end of Act 3. We're going to talk about explosive shot first. When I first started the game, I actually didn't run explosive shot. I ran galvanic shards. This was a really, really great source of AoE damage that made it much faster to get through the game. I also put a lot into Flash Grenade as I ran through, because through the first 20-25 levels, Flash Grenade is actually enough damage to kill pretty much anything as soon as it goes off. So those are really, really good choices early on, which is why they're going to be in the build guide but not on the page here. So for Explosive Shot, we're going to be running Martial Tempo. Explosive Shot is going to be able to detonate your gas, and we'll talk about that when we get to the gas grenades. But we want to be able to do this a lot faster, so we put Martial Tempo in here to increase the attack speed. We went with Double Barrel. Supported skills have 30% less reload speed, but they're also going to have an additional bolt. So instead of having just one bolt, they're going to have two. They're going to reload 30% faster, but you really do see a difference having it this way. We're going to be running Inevitable Critical. What this is going to do, it gives us 25% increased critical strike chance per second. Once we get up to 100% chance, if we crit at any point during that growth, it goes right back down to 0. This guarantees us after a couple seconds, we're going to have 100% critical strike chance. And if you're tossing out grenades, it gives you a couple seconds in between for that critical strike chance to go. And then when you shoot your explosive shot, it guarantees a crit. Next, we're going to be running gas grenades. This is going to shoot out some grenades that are going to leave poison clouds on the ground. Now, those poison clouds can explode. So if you hit the Alt button here and you look, the poison clouds have its own effect, and then the explosion also has its own effect. It converts 100% of physical damage into fire damage. This is why we wanted to stack a ton of physical damage, because we're getting 100% of that as fire damage here. So if you pull open this little tab, you can actually go into each one and you can see the damage. If you look, the impact itself doesn't really do much, but the explosion itself does quite a lot. We're going to be running multiple grenades, so this is going to be a huge, huge bit of damage every single time that they explode. How you get them to explode is anytime that you put any fire into that poison gas that explodes. Explosive Shot is going to be one of the ways that we do that. It's not going to be our only way, but that's going to be one of the ways it happens. We're also going to be running Magnified Effect here. Supported skills have a 40% larger area of effect, so the poison gases are now going to be even bigger. And then we're going to triple the poison gas grenades using Scatter Shot. This is going to add 2 additional projectiles. Grenades are considered projectiles. Supported skills have 20% less attack and cast speed. They also are going to deal a little bit less damage, but the damage that you see right here is actually the damage that is 20% less, so it's still doing quite a lot of damage with that in. Next one, we're going to be running flash grenades. Now, like I said in the very beginning, this was enough for me to actually kill pretty much everything in the game. So in the very beginning, I ran Scatter Shot here because I wanted to have a lot of them. It was a really great source of stun. It helped keep me alive in the very beginning. That changed a lot. So as you were building these builds and as you're starting from level 1, there are so many different ways to build things. So everybody's going to have their own versions, their own special ways, their own favorite ways of doing things. So share yours in the comments because I'd love to hear. Maybe we can get a whole new build guide for Mercenary back up for people. But I really did notice a huge bit of survivability and damage coming from these in the early stages. Once we got into the later game, the other things started to outshine them, as you can see here. It still does quite a bit of damage, but it's not quite as much, and you actually can blind yourself. So what this does is that it has a huge stun buildup, so you can stun enemies very, very quickly, but it also blinds enemies and allies, and you are considered an ally. So if you put it close to you, it blinds you. I don't really notice too much of a difference because what happens is most of it, your damage is coming from grenades anyway, but it does blind you, and especially in the early stages when you're using galvanic shards, you do notice a little bit of difference, but it really isn't too much to worry about. You're also going to be running Second Wind. Supported skills have 50% less cooldown rate, and supported skills have twice as many cooldown uses. So we're going to double the amount of uses that we have for Flash Grenade. We're also going to have 50% less cooldown recovery rate. So it's a really great skill to use here. We're also going to be running Overpower. Hits with the supported skill cause 50% more stun buildup. So we want to have this stun enemies as much as you can. This is for your oh no moment where you ran into a group, you got surrounded, you had no way out. You can stun them and wait for your other grenades to go off and get out of the way. We're going to be running Oil Grenade. This I added in later on, and you'll see it in the planner. What this does, fires a bouncing grenade that bursts in a spray of oil when the fuse expires, or when it impacts an enemy, dealing minimal damage but covering the ground and nearby enemies in oil. Oil created this way can be ignited by a detonator skill or ignited ground. Any of the enemies that are hit by the oil, they are slowed by 20%. They also lose 20% fire resistance. The oil on the ground slows movement speed by 30%. Oil on the ground also reduces the fire resistance by 20%. So if you know you're going into a big group, you throw this out, this goes off, they have lower fire resistance, we throw out a poison grenade, then you blow up that poison grenade, and then all of that fire damage from the explosion does extra damage because we have lowered the resistances from this oil grenade here to fire. Inside of this one, we're going to be running Magnified Effect. This is going to make the oil spell on the ground 40% bigger. We're also going to be running Persistence. Supported skills have 40% less skill effect duration. Next, we're going to be running Explosive Grenades. This is going to be one of your biggest sources of damage. What this does, it converts 80% of the physical damage to fire. Remember, we're going to be lowering fire resistance through the oil, and we're also going to be igniting your poison gas with fire. This does fire. We're also going to be throwing 3 of these because we're also going to be running Scattershot here. Because we're running the Ascendancy points, and we've completed both of our Ascendancies, you can use 2 of the same support gems in 2 different abilities. It's one of the benefits of running a Gemling here. So this is going to give us 3 grenades that are going to shoot out. Then we're also going to be running Execute. Supported skills deal 40% more damage on hits against enemies that are at low life. So when we get something like a boss that gets to low life, we start doing additional damage to them. We're going to be running Payload. Supported skills have a 70% reduced recovery rate. So the cooldown will come up a little bit slower, but supported skills also grant a 50% chance to activate a second time. We're throwing out 3 grenades, and now we have a chance for it to go off twice. So that could be up to 6 grenades going off all at one time. It's some pretty massive damage. When you get your very first set of Spirit, and this is going to be in Act 1, you go to Freyton, make sure you go and do that. It's right in Act 1 in the very beginning, so you can get your first 30 Spirit here. We're going to be running Wind Dancer. This is going to help throughout the entire process. This stacks 3 stages of evasion rating, 18% per stage. When you get hit by a melee attack, it's going to consume all of the stages. But remember, we're not going to be too close to the enemies. We're going to be kind of on top of them, but not right within melee distance, so that this will be up a lot of the time. That's what these little glowy things around me are that looks like smoke. That is Wind Dancer. This is going to be a good source of survivability to make sure that we can get through the game. When you get into your Act 3 for the first time on normal, that's where you can go to the bog. You can kill the witch. He'll give you 30 more spirit. That's when you can get Overwhelming Presence. We can't run Clarity until Act 3 of Cruel, unless you find a piece of gear with spirit on it, because Clarity counts as 10 spirit. So it's a total of 70 between the two. If you find something with spirit on it that works for your build, then you can put Clarity in as soon as you get it. This will help with the mana generation, but I had to wait until Act 3 of Cruel because I didn't find any pieces of gear that worked for me. For the last ability, and this was the last one I added into the game, was Cluster Grenade. This is kind of fun. It throws out a bouncing grenade. When it explodes, throwing out a nova of mini grenades, and they explode when they stop moving. So it actually has a delay. You see it go off, then nothing happens, and they stop rolling, and then everything explodes all over the whole screen. So just an additional layer of explosions that we're going to add to it. So what this looks like here, if you look at it here, the mini grenades actually do a little bit less than the grenades itself, but there are so many of them. Projectiles fired is 14. So you have 14 grenades doing almost 900 damage a piece. So this is a really, really good source of damage that you're going to be doing here. Inside of this, we're going to be running Ingenuity. Support skills with cooldowns, increasing the rate at which they recover. So we're going to have these cooldown 30% faster. Now we only have 2 of these as opposed to the 4 that we have of all of the other ones. You can see the numbers right here above the skills. This indicates how many you have. I have 2 of my cluster grenades, but 4 of all of the other grenades, and those are going to come through the passives in your passive tree. We're also going to be running Fast Forward. Supported skills have 30% less skill effect duration. So they roll and then stop. So we'll have 30% less time that they're going to roll and stop and then blow up. We're also going to be running Ignition. Supported skills have 100% more chance to ignite. So this is going to give the chance for enemy to get hit and ignite at the same time. So this is going to be just a little bit of additional damage for us here. So like I said, make sure you follow along with the planner to follow along with where you're at with your mercenary journey, so you can use the right support gems and you can get the right passive setup. It includes the passive tree. Inside of the planner, I have each layer of passives that you can go through, and you can see the progression as it goes. So for the passive tree, we're going to start with your ascendancy points. Depending on where you're at with your character or your gear, I was able to get through my first ascendancy at level 21 and my second one at level 36. So depending on where your character is and where your skills are at and what you found, you should shoot for somewhere around anywhere from 22 to 30 for your first one, and anywhere from 35 to 45 for your second one. Somewhere around there will be a good target range for you to go in. What we're going to be doing is we're going to come all the way down here through Gem Studded. This is where you can use 2 support gems of the same type in 2 different abilities. This is going to be the leveling version of this. Eventually, we're going to be going into enhanced effectiveness and then probably into this right here, but I don't really know yet once we get into the end game. But as you're leveling, having these 2 makes it so you can throw out a ton of grenades. I really enjoyed having this here, so this was the direction that we went. As we go through, and you can follow along with the planners itself, but we are going to be going into some defensive and also into some offensive here. For some of the keynotes here, we're going to be going into remorselessness, 15% increased projectile damage. Now your grenades and your crossbow are considered projectiles, so we're going to have additional damage for both, more stun buildup, strength, and dexterity. Now I did say that I went into a lot of strength. Strength gives life. Dexterity gives accuracy. So we don't actually need to go into dexterity unless we have to satisfy some of the requirements for our gear and for our skills. So the only time you're going to need to take dexterity. So as you go through your little nodes here, pick the ones that are going to be the best for your build. We're going to be going into heavy ammunition, 8% increase in attack speed, 8% increase attack speed, 40% increase projectile damage, and then 40% increase stun buildup. We're going to be getting more evasion rating here. Hits against you have a 20% reduced critical strike damage bonus, which is great. And then we're going to get 20% increased armor and evasion. We're also going to go into mass hysteria. We're going to get 6% increase attack speed here. And then coming down to devastation, 15% increase area damage. That means that all of the area of effect, like the grenades exploding, get a 15% increased damage, 15% increased area of effects for attacks. That's going to increase the areas that our grenades are going to hit for. We're also going to be taking a volatile catalyst, 10% increase area of effect. So we're increasing the size of these grenades as much as we can. And then we're going to have a little bit more cooldown on the times that the grenades come up. We're also going to be running ricochet, 15% increased projectile damage. And then we have a 10% chance to chain an additional time from the terrain. That means if they roll past something and they hit something, it has a chance to bounce back so that it will roll back towards the enemy itself. Coming down into this little tree here, we're going to be going into Colossal Weapon, 15% increased area of effect for attacks, 10 strength, more life. We're going to be going into Curved Weapon, 15% increased accuracy rating, and then 10 dexterity. Overwhelm, 5% reduced attack speed, but that's okay because we're going to get more stun buildup and then 40% increased damage with a 2-handed weapon. We're going to be running a crossbow, which is a 2-handed weapon. We're going to be going into Cluster Bomb, 50% increased grenade fuse duration. We're going to increase the time before they explode, but that actually is okay because we're going to be adding an additional projectile. We're going to cast 4 of them for most of the skills that we're using. It's so many. It's really cool to see all of the grenades go out at one time. Then we're going to be running Grenadier. Grenades have a +1 cooldown use. That's why we have 4, 2, and 4. That's why we have all of the additional ones down here. Normally it would be 3 and 1. Then we're going to be going into Volatile Grenades, 25% reduced grenades fuse duration. Now we just increased it by 50%, but then we're also dropping it by 25%. So we're going to be counteracting that quite a bit. Then we're going to be coming down. We're going to go into Sand in the Eyes. 10% increase attack speed, 15% chance to blind enemies on hit with attacks. Repeating explosives. Grenades have a 15% chance to activate a second time. We already get double the chance with our explosive grenades. Now all of them have a 15% chance to double up. We're going to be going into Polymathy. 10% increased attributes. So all of your attributes are being increased by 10%. It's a pretty big buff here. We're going to be going into Authority. 20% increased area of effects for attack, 10% increased cooldown recovery rate, 25% increased break armor duration, 25% increased area damage. Now, the break armor duration, what we're going to be doing, if you go pull up the skills again and we go into our explosive grenades, you scroll down here, your explosion here actually triggers 80% armor break. So now the more that these go off, the more armor break that goes off. When we have that, we're going to be increasing the duration that that's on the monsters for. 25% increase attack area damage here, and then for the jewels. Now the jewels that I put in were just the jewels that I found. So I found anything with increased damage, anything with increased attack speed. So whatever you can find, stun buildup is always going to be a great option for you. And then I found one with mana generation on it, so I put that on because when I'm running your early build, sometimes mana generation for the gear that you have isn't the best. So those were the choices that I made for the skill tree here. So if you open up the planner here, you can see that this matches exactly what it is here. So you don't have to pause this video. You can pull up the planner and you can go through and you can look at where all of the skills are laid out. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can minimize and close it. It is a really, really great tool to use. So make sure that you take advantage of it. Okay, we're going to go kill some monsters so you can see what the rotation looks like. I'm going to hop into my very first maps. With this build, I haven't changed a thing. So we're going to go hop into the first maps so you can see how this is going to be effective in a map. And I'll talk about the rotation that we're going to run as you go through and you kill the monsters with it. So here we are, very first maps on this character with the campaign build. I haven't even swapped to an endgame build yet. We're going to be running oil. So here we are. Inside of the very first maps, we're still running exactly the same gear that we had. I haven't even swapped anything yet to the endgame build that we're going to be running. So we'll talk about the rotation, how you do it, and then what you're going to use as you're leveling throughout the campaign. So as you're leveling, you're going to be using explosive shot to ignite your gas grenades when it happens, if you need to. What we're going to do is we're going to start with oil grenade, then you're going to throw out your gas grenades, and then you're going to alternate between your cluster and your explosive grenades. Whenever your gas grenade explodes, you throw another one out. You're going to use your flash grenades in case you get stuck in a sticky situation. But we're going to start by throwing out your oil grenades. Then you're going to throw your gas. Then you're going to throw your explosive and then your cluster. And then you just watch as everything just blows up. So that's it. You just rinse and repeat with that. If you need to, like you get your gas out here, you just use your explosive shot. An explosive shot will ignite your gas as well. So oil, explosive, gas, and then your cluster grenades, and then it's just everything blows up. So you can basically just, as you're going through, you just run just like this. You keep on throwing them out, and then you basically don't even need to stop moving. You can just keep on running through the game as you go. It lights the floor on fire when you're using your cluster grenades. So you actually are going to take advantage of using your gas grenades and the explosion when it hits the ground. So that's an elite and a rare on our very first map here. But that's your build right there. That is it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Give it a try. If there's anything that you would like to see done differently inside the planners or with these build guides, I'm very open to feedback. I love hearing from you. Respond to me in the comments. I am live every single night. Stop by, say hi, theorycraft with me. Catch you on the clip side.